Okay, hey, afternoon, everybody. When FHIR kind of came and asked us to do this session, we were like, Rahn, I don't know. I think if the only way we would do this is if it was like the last afternoon of the conference, right after lunch. And so he eventually like broke down, and so here we are. So thanks for joining. My name's Isaac Vetter. I work on tools and standards that help developers build health apps. We're going to talk through IPS and IPA. We're going to go through and do a round of introductions, and then kind of go into our content.
Hey everybody, Matt Rahn. I'm the director of the Standards Division at the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT for the U.S. Ministry of Health. My team works on U.S. Core Data for Interoperability, Standards Version Advancement Process, and all the HL7 related work that we do, whether publishing U.S. Core and CCDA. So, and on the side, I do dabble with IPS as a pet project for myself. Jason.
All right, hi, I'm Jason Vogt, the development manager at Meditech, working on all of our APIs and structured documents. Also a steering committee member of Argonaut, the technical chair of the Commonwealth STIG committee, and all around good guy. Thank you.
And I'm Dr. Brian Thomas Karras. I'm a recognized good troublemaker. I don't know if I'm a good guy. I'm the Chief Medical Informatics Officer for Washington State Department of Health, also faculty at the UW, and a member of the high-tech FHIR. All right, and I'm up. So what we're hoping to accomplish in this session is do a bit of introductory and run through of IPA, IPS. I'll do a demonstration of WA Verify Plus, talk about how we in the state of Washington got to this place, and then talk about how IPA servers and IPS standards really do work better together. And we have a report out from Matt on GDHP and what ONC is doing to support this initiative. And then we've got some special announcements from some of our partners. So peanut butter and jelly did not exist forever. It became a standard through the process of discovery and then dissemination of the information, getting everybody to agree. But perhaps no one agrees exactly on the proper ratio of peanut butter to jelly. So I think there's an IG is needed for the, but it has been around since 1901, the first instance that we could find. We took the headline here for variety, try mixing these two on a sandwich. We took that text and substituted in our use case for better care, try making patient summaries with FHIR documents, IPA content, which include allergies, medication problems as the required ingredients. The combination is delicious, and as far as we know, interoperable. This was the language we used in our proposal, and I'm still kind of shocked that it was accepted. Maybe it was as Isaac said, it was the last day. You're the only ones that were willing to stick around. But Isaac asked me to figure out, what is the tie? Why is Washington State so interested in this? And I searched the internet for keywords, peanut butter and jelly and Seattle, and came up with Elvis Presley's recipe for peanut butter and jelly sandwich with bananas added, which was introduced, I think, deep fried at the Seattle 1962 World's Fair. And how many people have watched the movie It Happened at the World's Fair? Anybody? Just, okay, no, I'm advancing, nobody cares.
I'll be pretty brief on this, but just, and then Isaac has a lot of slides on IPA, way more than on IPS, but I think most people are aware of IPS. But IPS is just a standardized set of basic clinical data that is supposed to be your most important healthcare that you would need in a cross-border scenario. So just a brief summary of your patient's clinical data. The required ones are problems, allergies, medications, and immunizations is also mostly used. So they've been calling it PAMI is the one thing you would probably most be using. But there's about 14 data elements that are inclusive of IPS. And then, but it is meant to be minimal, non-exhaustive set of basic clinical data for cross-border care, and that can be any sort of border. So Canada, provinces in the States, counties, but it's being used all over the world in different, across different types of borders, but it's supposed to be for unscheduled patient care. I'll just talk briefly. Canada has been a big partner on the IPS evolution. They have their own version of what we have in the US called US Core Data for Interoperability. They have a version in Canada, and they also added on to the base IPS, and so they have other data that they're also looking for. But in the province, each province has their own, so they will be like exchanging possibly across provinces. They've been doing a lot of projectathons that are similar to our FHIR Connectathons to help improve the adoption. They've been rapidly pushing this in each of their provinces. So some might be behind more than others, but there is active adoption of IPS in Canada. And I'll bring up New Zealand as well. They have a similar approach. They're using their data model based off of IPS as well. They have their own version of IPS that they have more data than just what's in the base IPS. They also been very much involved in all the different development work that's been going on. Peter Jordan in New Zealand has been at all of our FHIR Connectathons, super helpful. Other countries have also been involved. Australia, Brazil, just recently was at the FHIR Connectathon in Dallas. Just a lot of support is going on around this, and you'll hear a little bit from some of the vendors to talk a little bit about what they're going to be doing to support IPS. So I'm going to turn it over to Isaac, and he's going to talk a little bit about IPA.
Yeah, hey everybody. So IPA stands for International Patient Access. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, kind of introduce the IPA project, talk a little bit about its aims, its goals, what it is, and then where we are, and then also how it relates to and differs from International Patient Summary. So International Patient Access we're trying to capitalize on as nations and regulators across the world look to increase citizens' access to health data through third-party apps. They naturally turn to FHIR. That's unsurprising to this community, right? So IPA aims to enable regulators and empower patients and guide app developers, and by promising greater consistency across countries for multinational apps and FHIR servers. So it specifies the IPA specification, the FHIR IG, specifies how a patient can securely and selectively authenticate and authorize the sharing of health data regardless of the locale. And this is through through specification of really widely implemented, proven OAuth and RESTful FHIR technologies. The use of FHIR continues to grow in a number of countries. This is a map of all of the national cores across the globe as of a couple months ago. I'm certain I'm missing one. Would love to keep this up to date if you've got feedback. Also, bit.ly URL. Raise your hand if you know what a raise your hand if you know what a national core is. What is that? If that you know what that means. Okay, so about 2/3 or so, three of the audience. So if you're familiar with the U.S. core, we kind of consider that that's this baseline national FHIR specification that defines some profiles, maybe specifies the use of REST. What we're seeing across the globe is that lots of nations are defining their own national cores. And I'll actually refer to a few. And so, I'm a little conflicted about that fact, about this map. Like first, can you believe that FHIR is in that many countries? It's like multiple dozens of countries at this point. I think that's really exciting, how fast we've seen FHIR grow, spread across the globe. On the other hand, I really feel a sense of urgency when I look at this map. There's no coordinating entity here. In fact, HL7 actually produces relatively few universal realm guides. And most FHIR IGs are designed to function only within a specific locale. To identify the resources and functionality that we profiled in IPA, we actually surveyed all of the different national cores and FHIR access specs that existed at the time to look for what was in common. And then we took what was in common, what was most in common, and we put it together, and that's IPA. That is a set of minimal clinical profiles, minimal FHIR profiles, using REST, defining some search parameters, no terminology, and the use of Smart on FHIR as an authentication authorization mechanism. Since we initially defined and published IPA, we have seen some of the most sophisticated locales look to some of these universal specs. So this is a screenshot of Australia's national core, AU core. As part of developing and publishing their national core, they actually went through and documented an analysis of their national core's relationship to both IPA and IPS. And Canada has done something similar. So a more rigorous approach to reuse of universal standards is actually something that Finland's doing. Finland calls their core a base. We're still working on the terminology, I think, as a community. But Finland's national core actually inherits from IPA. And so it's even more rigorously tied to a universal realm specification. And interestingly, so Vulcan is a HL7 International FHIR accelerator focused on research. They want their specifications, they want their IGs and functionality to work in the US and in the EU and everywhere around the globe. And so they are actually basing some of the IGs that they create on IPA. Okay, so all that seems great. We're making some progress, right? But is this actually a possible problem to solve? The idea is can an app actually work anywhere in the world? If I, as a patient, download a patient app on my phone, can I connect to a US health system and a UK health system and a Australian health system? And the fact of the matter is there are real, obvious, and legitimate differences, social differences in different locales. I think some really gnarlier than you'd think examples are things like how names are represented, how Dutch street addresses are represented. Any Dutch in here? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, but what we can do with IPA is can almost make a promise to app developers, to FHIR server developers, to specification authors on, hey, this is what's supposed to work in different countries. because it's this least common denominator. And frankly, we're still kind of figuring some of this out. One of the neat things about IPA is there's so many constituents, and this is a good project for every single one of them. So first, primarily for patients. I think patients can benefit from promulgation, from reuse, from use of IPA through greater access to health data, as well as the likelihood, the promise of a broader choice of health applications. If I, as a patient, can access my data using apps developed in the US or apps developed in Canada, I have more choice. For app developers, IPA not only kind of provides a set of guidelines and best practices for developers who are new to health IT or maybe FHIR, but it also kind of sets that base layer. For regulators, IPA is a starting place for governments to jumpstart API access for their citizens. And for FHIR servers, it enables reusable software across markets, across national borders, and even specification authors. Okay. So that's great. So we've published version STU1, I think last summer sometime, last fall. And so since then, we've really tried to turn our sights onto how do we kind of socialize and market and promote IPA as a tool available to those different audiences. And so Argonaut kind of recently kicked off a project to sponsor and hire like a third-party professional, web marketing firm. So just to create a website that describes IPA and the ability to access health information to consumers, to citizens, and regulators, and really kind of with plain spoken words and the ability to, with at least starting with 2 languages, and the ability to expand to more. So one of the things that we're going to do, probably next spring, is kind of put out a call to action to this community to say, hey, come and contribute some of your linguistic expertise here. We want this site, we want this tool to be as accessible to as many societies, as many languages as we can. Okay, so we all know like IPS is this patient summary document, like kind of defines like it's a summary of my patient information. It's my chart. So it's all those FHIR, and in the form of FHIR profiles. But like, isn't that what IPA is too? Like, are these things duplicative? Raise your hand if you think they're duplicative. Oh, you guys already know this. Dave. Okay. All right. So here's how, as projects, in fact, the IPA and IPS projects, like 50% of the community overlap, and we have our calls right next to each other. And Rob is in the front row here, and this session is happening. So IPS, I think, really kind of defines is the primary, these content profiles. So these content profiles get packaged into a FHIR document, and then that FHIR document can be exchanged in any number of ways. IPA has really even more minimal profiles than IPS and IPS's content conforms to these minimal IPA profiles. IPA is primarily about how information is accessed, how information is retrieved, how authentication and authorization works, what search parameters can you use, the use of REST as an access layer instead of all of the different ways that we are going to push and pull documents. And that's it. And so in summary, I just want to say, like, I want you to think about the two, just that last letter, right? So IPS is a summary. That is its core function. IPA is access. Access in like the way, and as a verb. John Diamore, important part of these projects, who was not able to be here this week, actually kind of came up with the kind of corny, but I also think like really helpful analogy that IPA is literally a verb and IPS is a noun. So you IPA your IPS, corny, but you access your summary, right? And so I think that that's actually a really helpful way to kind of think about how these two guides relate. Okay, and so next we're going to talk about WA Verify Plus with Bryant.
Right. So for the next hour, I'm going to demonstrate. So how many people in the room have heard of WA Verify? Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we may be done here. But for everybody else, WA Verify was a really exciting project that was thrown on my plate by, as many things in government are, by a governor's directive. This arbitrary date, we will have a mechanism for everybody in the state to prove their vaccine status in order to enter into restaurants, bars, large music venues. Did anybody else have similar? Okay. One other government official in the back is having, exactly. And of course it was a reasonable rollout date, right? It was like sometime in the distant future. No, it was in 8 weeks. So we needed to move quickly. And so we relied on looking at standards and working with our partners. This was, I think, an incredibly successful demonstration of public-private academic partnerships. We all came together, all hands on deck, and is all hands on deck a military reference, or is it just when something, it could be a storm that was coming, it doesn't have to be. Okay. We went through an incredible amount of work to get this up and running in time, and had this great plan to put it into production servers and then keep testing it for 2 more weeks ahead of the governor's deadline. And then this happened. And if you read the print of the story, it says, Washington State Department of Health quietly launches a tool that actually works. Which, if you're going to be on the front page of the Seattle Times for doing something good, that's when you want to be on the front page. But what they didn't realize is they were going to cause a massive adoption curve. That the orange line is WA Verify users, and that article came out, and the servers that were designed to respond with a QR code in 90 seconds were starting to take 15 minutes, half an hour. Everybody was hitting against the website, so we called our friends at Microsoft, and they turned it up to 11, and everything was fine. But it was not the quiet testing that we had envisioned. But the exciting thing is that we eventually, and it's still live today, there are still people who lose their CDC vaccine cards and want to find a way to prove or remind themselves, which booster did I have? I'm not sure if I'm supposed to get this one or already got it. So we're creeping up on 2 million users. So I mentioned the collaboration. It wasn't just us, multiple states. In fact, the Western governors agreed to do this all at the same time. So Oregon, Washington, California were all moving in lockstep. We actually shared code through the GitHub repository, so making improvements to how this worked back and forth. Even state governments don't trust each other, so we had MITRE Corporation do code review of the GitHub repositories so that there wasn't any accidental intrusion of backdoors between the code that was being implemented. And I mentioned our Microsoft colleagues who are hosting each of the 3 states. So here's the URL of what we've evolved to now. We're calling it Wall Verify Plus for the moment, and we wanted to go beyond COVID vaccines and do the entire international patient summary. This is a proof of concept. It's fully operational, but it is not yet being like promoted or used by the public. So when you go to that website, it will say this is not for production use, for demonstration purposes only. There's multiple methods of storing and carrying your FHIR-based IPS with you, a FHIR URL, the FHIR bundles themselves, or the banana that we like to include in the peanut butter and jelly, the use of smart health links. Is Josh in the room? I don't know if Josh would like me referring to that as the banana, but we'll work on that. And I should mention one of the questions that everybody asks is, how does the patient protect their data? This is a cryptographically issued mechanism, but patients are able to add a PIN or a code in front of the data so that only they control who gets access to this. So here's again the process. This seems redundant from what you went through, Isaac, but except with the QR code issuance. So the scenario is that the patient, patient-enabled access to their own data, which is allowed in the U.S. because of the I'm forgetting the name of the regulation, 21st Century Cures Act. They can access their data in an IPA format, pull it down as IPS. We then package it and give them a cryptographically unique URL in the form of a QR code so they can readily share it with others. So the patient then traveling perhaps across the border to a foreign country from Washington, like Canada, or a foreign country from Washington, like Idaho. Actually, I recently learned that in our state legislation, they've deemed Hawaii requires international travel authorization as a state government employee. Thought that was a nice twist. I may have to go to Hawaii to test our IPS, IPA interoperability with that foreign country. But you can imagine the scenario where you're in a foreign country, you know they don't have access to your HIE at home, but you've got it with you in this QR code that anybody can scan with their phone, bring up those FHIR bundles in the human readable format, which I'll demonstrate in a second. And there we go. And so some of my thunder was stolen yesterday by Matt. Thank you, Matt. But I think, and Dave is in the back of the audience, and I was incredibly proud when he waved one of our WA Verify cards that we issued with his information on it. The past couple of connectathons have been really satisfying. The amount of progress we've made in the past year is quite amazing. I think one other milestone we reached in the January Connectathon, the virtual Connectathon, we were issued an IPA certificate. If you remember, we asked for where is the certificate itself, and I think Isaac had ChatGPT create a stamp of approval and emailed it to us. At any rate, I think I will transition here to, do we want to do our last segment and then go into the this is the collaborators. Oh, and you can scan this for people who are interested in borrowing our code. We have a page here with 2-pagers to help leadership understand what these various projects that we are working on in collaboration between DOH and the UW. And there's also a link there to our GitHub repository, which I will show. I have lost where that page tab is. Did it get closed? Oh, here it is. So we have a GitHub repository. Oh, we have to drag that over. So we have a GitHub repository with both the original WAVerify modules and components, which is open code, and then I think the more open source approach for WAVerify Plus. All right. So, how are we doing on time? Yeah. Lots of time. All right. Do you want me to do that now, or do you want to talk about GDHP first?
It's them, me and them too.
Yeah. It's my last chance. All right. They're not going to let me come back up. Okay. All right. Oh, it's up there now. Sorry. Where's the cursor? All right, here we go. So, this is the
GitHub repo is on that page also for anybody who
needs
it.
there we go. So what we've created here is a proof of concept that, as you can see, we've initially proven it out with Epic and Oracle sites, as well as one that's hitting against John Demore's demo repository. But I'm gonna, for sake of this demonstration, I'm gonna skip the step of logging into your Epic My Chart to pull down data. We can go through that another time, or you can go through that process on your own when you go to this website. But here we've preloaded sample patients, and then a sample patient's information, and then generated both the IPS and a Smart Health Link QR code that allows you to get to that IPS readily and share that easily with anybody. So if that's big enough, let me see if I can move it around while people are trying to take pictures. And people are able to grab that with their phone. Now imagine you're a doctor in an emergency room, you've got a patient in front of you that doesn't speak the same language, or even worse, they're unconscious. You have no way of knowing what's going on with them. You find this QR code in their wallet, or it's on their lock screen of their phone, or in a yet-to-be-determined wallet functionality on various phone platforms. You can scan that QR code. Hopefully they chose not to put a pin in front of it if they're unconscious, and get access to a summary of their key problems, the medications they're on, their allergies, and it's potentially game-changing. And there's the use cases, some of them completely obvious, but there are ones that happen with increased frequency in our global society, of people who get sick during an airplane, travel across continents, land, and they get stuck in a quarantine station in the country that they're landing in, with a doctor who doesn't have access to their medical record, trying to figure out what's going on with this individual. So is this an infectious disease that I need to protect our country from? Or is this something that is completely benign and this person needs to get into an intensive care unit and get treatment right away? And meanwhile, the people who are on the plane with that sick individual are kept there until that determination is made. So we very much are going to need these kinds of information. So here's where, even after you've issued it, you can modify, get a newly created QR code with a PIN or a passcode in front of it if there's a situation where you're going to a country where you may not want all the elements of your IPS shared. And then let me show one other feature. So when people are playing with this user interface is trying to be simplified for a patient concept or demonstration. But for all of you in the room, go under Actions and open up Showing Advanced Features, which opens up some of the under the hood components, like the ability to where is the, home, got it. So back at home here, with the advanced features enabled, you should be able to access, you gotta go? Okay, just quickly, you can.
Getting us out of this room soon.
Oh, I thought we had, you can pull up additional smart patients, like, this is the big reveal, Dave, who's kindly volunteered his data to be used for testing and experimentation. So you can go here and fetch your own ePatient Dave QR code. So thank you, Dave. All right, back to the slides.
Maybe hit shift F5. Function. Yeah, and now. There we go.
Perfect.
That's confusing as hell, isn't it? I have no idea. Let's look at that one.
But let's see if it'll.
You start talking.
All right. So I'm going to be very quick because I was just notified that we're actually out of here at 2:30 and not 2:45. You've probably heard, if you were at my talk yesterday, you heard about Global Digital Health Partnership, but I'm going to repeat it today. So this is a group of countries that got together in 2018 to work on digital health across the world. Just given opportunities to advance different work that is going on and facilitate the ability for looking out for future trends that could be happening in different countries. There's currently 36. I'll have to update that slide. Oh, well, I don't know where it went, but. I don't know, there's something messed up. But okay, well, anyways, I'll just be very quick. But there's 5 different work streams. There's 36 countries, territories, and organizations that are part of the GDHP. And WHO is one of them. They've been working on a lot of different work around IPS, and so we've been very much involved with some of the work they've been doing in some of the low and middle income countries as well. But for the work that we've been doing with IPS, there's an interoperability work stream. As part of that, there are different projects, and we've been working on IPS for a couple of years now. And so when we first started, we were struggling to move forward because there was a lot of concerns on, like, how would we do provider to provider use case between the different countries, and ultimately we decided that we needed to remove the barrier of the privacy and security related things that could occur with that type of use case. And there's also some language translation issues as well. But so we focused on patient-mediated, and that's why we've been very much focused on some of the IPS to smart health links that you've been seeing a little bit today. And so we've been participating in all the different connectathons. Black Pass, Canada has had projectathons, HL7 FHIR connectathons, IHE has had connectathons. And so there's been people that are part of GDHP that in different countries have been participating in that. But you saw before there was the big map. If your country's not in there, please let me know. We should talk so we can get it in there. But we've been holding our own mini connectathons as well to kind of help. That also gets, filtered back to the bigger, larger group of the FHIR connectathons if there's any updates that need to happen. So I'll just mention there is some tooling like the IPS viewer, IPS generation with Happy, so thanks Smile Digital Health for that. There is going to be a ballot for FHIR IPS, CDA IPS, and for Smart Health Links in September. So please do pay attention to that. But since we only have so much time, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. At the working group meeting, we had some really good news that he's going to share around IPS, and there's Meditech support for that. So thank you. I don't know, it's got
These seem to be totally unrelated. So we have to focus on how you can try to fix this. I don't know if it's working. So just click.
Yeah.
Just click here, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so at the HL7 working group meeting we're in June, so May, I was at a meeting, Isaac gave me the eye, and I said, okay, I'll finally announce it. So Meditech is putting our hat in the ring for International Patient Summary. Matt asked me a little bit to talk here today, and then hopefully announce that at a GDHP meeting in the near future, and kind of just talk about the why. So we're actually not focused on the US in this workflow at all. I mean, it can be used in the US, but we're really focusing on all the other countries that Meditech actually has a share in, and primarily in the next slide is Canada. Like, we have a very big footprint in Canada between Ontario, British Columbia, and that's the primary focus of what our implementation is. So just to kind of talk about why we did this, and this two-screen thing is really messing me up now. So this is just try to further our transition into FHIR. If anybody's ever heard me speak, talk a lot about how FHIR is the transition that we're moving towards. Document exchange was good for what it was worth, but it's not the future. We really need to continue to do this via FHIR standards. So this helps us move towards that. Sets us up to be able to utilize and extract or write FHIR data in. If we can do that through a write process in our RESTful server, extracting it out of a composition resource will be even easier to do that. For those familiar with the ITK3 work that they did in the United Kingdom, that was also composition based. So we have a lot of that code that we did 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, maybe it's far longer than that. Pre-pandemic, before that we can build off of, and then support those 2 Canadian summaries that we know of right now. We have the Pan-Canadian patient summary and then the Ontario patient summary. Our implementation should hopefully be able to support the base IPS standard and then both of the Canadian ones listed on the slide. And then just talk a little bit what's in scope and out of scope. Like I said, those 3 that I just mentioned, our timeline is to get a document created and ready for a Connectathon in September so that we can come and then continue to learn and engage in the community on what that structure should look like. What does summary actually mean? And then to be determined, like, how are we going to transport the mechanisms? What does our Smart Health Link approach look like? Are we going to support that? When are we going to support that? That has a little bit more infrastructure tied to it than just creating the IPS itself. And then ultimately, what that ingestion process looks like for the summary itself. Thank you.
Okay. Isaac Vetter, Epic. So I think as Jason described, so like so we see this kind of patient-mediated use case that we talked through with WA Verify, right, where the patient has that QR code, or the patient is the mechanism of interoperability. So, and I think Jason kind of introduced this concept of provider-to-provider exchange, which is also, has been a big area of focus for us in general around interoperability. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about current state of document-based interoperability for provider-to-provider exchange, which is incredibly common. So especially in the US as well as other countries. So HL7 CDA specification and IHE protocols are the backbone of interoperability in many countries. The use of FHIR really pales in comparison to the real-world daily difference that CDA documents and IHEs, some of the IHE protocols make. Epic, across our kind of community, we exchange 20 million patient records every day with that CDA and IHE technologies. So, and that includes Canada, Australia, UK, Netherlands, as well as the US are all exchanging CDA documents, including actually across national borders. So our first international exchange was between a Netherlands hospital, Radboud, an academic medical center, to Monroe Clinic, which is a health system that's just a couple hours drive from here. So CD exchange is an important technology that's saving lives today. And the reason I'm kind of introducing this is because I think with the industry, we are going to continue using CDA and IHE for decades, if not longer. However, and especially in locales that don't have a history or investment in CDA, we're beginning to see more and more of a need to interoperate using only FHIR. And so IPS is attractive to us because it as a document-based exchange, allows us to build upon the success that we've seen with document exchange over the years. And so we've announced our plans to support IPS. I think maybe really similar to Jason, we'll initially support generating an IPS document, and we're targeting the universal realm IPS, not yet one of the locale-specific profiles, and specifically the required sections in that universal spec. And then we're going to follow up quickly with results and procedure sections. We'll continue to add sections over time based upon community feedback. And as other countries in the others in the community also begin to produce IPS documents, I would say like Meditech is a great example, we'll develop support to receive and display those external docs. So IPS is actually also is an underlying data model that also has a CDA specification. So again, I mentioned this earlier that we're seeing some locales that interoperate using only FHIR, and that they just don't have a history with CDA. We're seeing net new integrations tend toward FHIR, but I think another advantage that isn't maybe immediately obvious is that FHIR has the benefit of supporting multiple integration exchange models. So hopefully, our hope is that resources that we develop for a document can also be exchanged RESTfully, can also be used as part of our existing support for CDS hooks or Firecast and bulk data. So FHIR documents just kind of doubles down on our support of FHIR. And remember, so that IPS is a noun and IPA is a verb. So I think this is a great example of the synergy of using FHIR for patient access via REST, and then patient summary via documents. And I think there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense to support IPS. So first, it's an international universal realm standard that's open to everyone. We've seen that be a key component to success of interoperability tools in the past. We've seen widespread engagement and support of IPS in locales across the world, some of which we've talked about earlier today. We've seen many groups are looking to this standard as a foundation for national programs. I think, and we've talked, Australia, New Zealand, Canada are 3 that we've talked about. Also, I think maybe something that we haven't talked about thus far is the document structure provides a narrative for each section that provides kind of a graceful step down for interoperable exchange of clinical data. So for systems that don't yet support IPS, that document's narrative still exchanges clinical information that's valuable and critical in the case of that ED visit. Okay, so big picture, we want to work with you, with everybody in the FHIR community to establish the IPS as a global means of FHIR-based interoperability. We believe that coming together on reusable standards benefits everyone, and to the extent we can, avoiding region-specific implementations that don't connect with one another. I think we're going to be at the September Connectathon. I heard Jason say that Meditech is too. We'd invite you to come and join that track, and as well as just engage with your local community partners, with your governments, with your neighbors around the world, so that together we can make this happen. Okay, so we talked about a lot of things. Intro to IPS and IPA. We talked about GDHP. We talked about how IPS and IPA pair together, access and summary, noun and verb. We talked about patient-mediated access via smart health links and those QR codes, provider-to-provider IPS, but with upcoming plans for Meditech and Epic, and then also how to get involved. So we have about 4 minutes, I think. And so what questions do you have, starting with ePatient Dave?
Very simple. Where can I do this? Where can I do the patient-mediated request today?
Yeah, so, and the plans, so maybe I didn't actually say it. So with Epic, so sometime next summer, we'll start rolling out support for IPS generation on our FHIR server. So I think it'll take a patient app. The initial step will be it'll take a patient app that just does the standard Smart on FHIR login process, like WA Verify, and then in order to and there'll be a single new API $summary on our FHIR server that will return to a patient, to an authenticated patient, their IPS document. Is that, Jason, you want to speak to?
Well, guys, I think we have to take questions outside because there's like a little bit of a scheduling snafu, and there's another meeting coming in. Sorry about that. 30 seconds if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, based on some of the discussions I had this week, I mean, I think, like you said, $summary will be available, and then its next question is like, can we make that, fit that into our portal, so that if they go to the patient portal, they could potentially get it and get a link or whatever it is. Like, a lot of to be determined there.
I also have my colleague Casey Fitzgerald, who's actually leading our IPS development project here, and so love to answer questions about Epic support or just in general, especially about IPA. And thank you for attending, and have a great end of your Dev Days.